The empire of Vera stretched across many stars. Its fleets shone like silver rivers, its cities glimmered with towers of crystal, and its rulers carried a proud history that went back thousands of years. At the center of that empire sat Queen Arya, a figure of beauty and sorrow. For many years she had ruled with wisdom, yet one wound never healed. She could not give her people an heir. In Veyran culture, the birth of an heir was more than family. It was tradition, continuity, and faith in the future. Without a child, whispers spread in hidden chambers. Some nobles claimed the queen had lost the blessing of the stars. Others worried enemies would rise if the throne appeared weak. The council urged her to consider every cure, every science, every ancient ritual, but none brought the hope of new life. As the pressure grew, the queen's advisors sought a bold answer. They looked beyond their own kind, beyond their worlds, and toward humanity. The humans were new among the stars, not as advanced as Vera, yet full of resilience. Some saw them as reckless, others as creative, but one truth could not be denied: humans had a rare spark that made them thrive against odds. The council proposed what had never been imagined before. If the queen could not bear an heir with her own people, then perhaps fate would allow a union with humanity. It was not only a matter of life but of diplomacy. An alliance through marriage could tie the two species closer, bringing peace, trade, and trust. Queen Arya listened in silence as the proposal was placed before her. To be given to another species as a bride was not what she had dreamed of. Yet she also understood the weight of her crown. She had sworn to guard her people, to keep the throne strong, and to ensure the future of her empire. With calm resolve, she agreed. On Earth, the news spread like fire. Some humans saw it as a chance to step into greatness. Others feared being swallowed by an alien empire. Many wondered what kind of man would be chosen to stand beside a queen of the stars. The Veyran council made their choice not from kings or generals, but from someone quiet and ordinary. His name was Ryan. He lived in a small village by rolling fields of green. He was not rich, not powerful, not even educated in great halls. But he was known by his neighbors as steady, patient, and kind. When disputes rose in the village, he listened before speaking. When children quarreled, he guided them back to laughter. When storms struck the fields, he worked harder, never cursing fate. The council believed such a man could offer what courts and palaces could not: a life without endless judgment, a heart without hidden ambition. They brought Ryan to the capital of Earth and explained his destiny. He would not simply be a husband. He would be part of a bridge between species. His first reaction was disbelief. Why would a queen ever look toward him, a farmer with calloused hands and a simple home? But after days of reflection, he accepted, not from pride but from duty. The ceremony of exchange was held aboard a vast ship that hung between the stars of two worlds. On one side, Veyran nobles in flowing robes of silver and blue stood with solemn grace. On the other, human leaders in dark uniforms watched with careful eyes. Between them, Queen Arya walked forward, tall and calm, her presence filling the chamber like music. Ryan stood waiting, his clothes plain yet neat, his face showing both awe and courage. When their eyes met for the first time, something silent passed between them. She saw not fear or greed in him, only sincerity. He saw not cold majesty in her, but a woman burdened by loneliness. The vows were spoken in both tongues, ancient Veyran and simple earth language. They promised respect, patience, and trust. There was no promise of love, for love could not be commanded. But there was promise of companionship, and that was enough to begin. When the ceremony ended, the queen did not return to her palace of crystal towers. She followed Ryan to his village, far from courts and crowns. The villagers watched in awe as their quiet neighbor returned with the queen beside him. Some whispered, some bowed, and some only stared. The queen, once surrounded by advisors and guards, now stepped into a modest home with wooden beams and stone walls. The air smelled of earth and bread, the sounds of animals drifted in from the fields. For the first time in years, she was not a ruler before her people. She was simply a guest in a humble house, beginning a life none could have imagined. Thus began the story of the childless queen and the human farmer. Two lives joined not by choice of the heart, but by the weight of destiny. Neither knew what awaited them, but in that quiet village under the wide human sky, the seeds of a miracle had already been planted. Life in the village was unlike anything Queen Arya had known before. In Vera, every morning began with council meetings, formal reports, and endless voices demanding her attention. Here, mornings began with the soft crow of roosters, the smell of bread baking, and the sound of Ryan chopping wood. It was a quieter rhythm, simple yet alive. At first, Arya felt out of place. Her robes of silver and crystal seemed too grand for the dirt paths and small cottages. She was used to speaking before crowds, yet here she hardly knew what to say to the women who came to the well or the children who stared at her with wide eyes. Ryan noticed her unease but did not press her with questions. He gave her time, letting her find her own steps in this new world. The people of the village were cautious. Some respected her as a queen from the stars, bowing their heads when she passed. Others whispered, unsure why such a powerful figure would live among them. A few even feared her, thinking she might bring strange customs or hidden rules. But Arya carried herself with quiet dignity. She did not demand respect, nor did she seek to command. She walked through the village as one among them, learning the ways of the people who now shared her days. Ryan became her guide. He showed her how to tend to the small garden behind their home, how to feed the animals, how to carry water from the well without spilling. To him, these were ordinary tasks, but to Arya, they felt new and grounding. For the first time in years, her hands were not carrying a scepter but soil and seed. As days turned into weeks, she began to see beauty in the simplicity. She watched children chase each other in fields, their laughter unguarded and free. She listened to old villagers tell stories by the fire, tales not of empires but of seasons and harvests. At night, she looked at the stars above, the same stars she had ruled beneath, but now they seemed closer, warmer, less like distant crowns and more like companions. Ryan was always nearby, steady and calm. He did not treat her as a queen to be obeyed, nor as a burden to be pitied. He treated her as a person. When she struggled with a task, he did not laugh or scold. He simply guided her hands, showing her the way, then stepping back to let her try again. Arya found comfort in his patience. She had been surrounded by advisors and nobles all her life, yet none had ever given her such quiet respect. In the evenings, they often sat together outside the small home, watching the fireflies drift above the grass. Sometimes they spoke, sometimes they sat in silence. Ryan would talk about the harvest, the changing weather, or the stories of his childhood. Arya would share memories of her own, though she spoke of them not as a queen but as a woman remembering moments of laughter and sorrow. Slowly, a bond began to form, not forced by duty but grown from understanding. The villagers, too, began to change in their view of her. One day, a child fell and scraped her knee in the road. Arya knelt down, tore a piece of cloth from her sleeve, and wrapped the wound with gentle hands. The child stopped crying, staring at the queen with surprise. The mother, watching from nearby, felt her fear fade. Word spread quickly that the Queen of Vera had cared for a child as if it were her own. From then on, more people greeted her not with bows, but with smiles. As the months passed, Arya began to feel something she had not felt in many years: belonging. She did not forget her throne or her people far away, but she no longer felt only like a ruler carrying a crown of sorrow. She felt like a woman learning to live, step by step, in a world that asked nothing from her but kindness. Yet even in this quiet life, a longing grew inside her heart. Each time she saw children running through the fields, each time she heard their laughter, she felt a deep ache. She had always wanted to hold a child of her own, to pass down her wisdom, her love, her hope. That dream had always seemed impossible. But here, surrounded by the warmth of simple human life, the dream stirred once more. One evening, as she and Ryan sat outside watching the stars, she finally spoke of it. Her voice was soft, almost trembling. She said she often wondered what it would feel like to raise a child in such a place, away from palaces and courts. Ryan listened quietly, his gaze steady on the sky. When she finished, he said only that hope should never be abandoned, no matter how long it slept. Arya looked at him then, truly looked. She saw not just a farmer, not just a man chosen by chance, but someone who carried strength without pride, someone who offered faith without demand. In that moment, something shifted in her heart. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe that perhaps fate still had a plan for her. And so, while the world beyond their village watched from a distance, the childless queen and the humble farmer continued their days in quiet harmony. What neither of them knew was that the stillness of their life was only the beginning. Deep within Arya, a miracle was preparing to awaken. Seasons passed quietly in the village. Queen Arya had grown used to the rhythm of human life, and the people had grown used to her presence. She was no longer seen only as the queen of the stars but also as a neighbor who greeted them with a gentle smile. Her days were filled with small tasks, learning from Ryan, and finding joy in simple things. Yet beneath her calm appearance, something began to change. It started with a weariness she could not explain. At first, she thought it was from working in the garden or helping with the animals, but the tiredness grew stronger. Then came the faint waves of sickness in the morning. Ryan noticed her pale face and her slower steps, but she brushed aside his concern. She had faced greater burdens before, she told herself, and this too would pass. But it did not pass. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Ryan watched her closely. Her hand pressed against her stomach, her expression thoughtful and unsure. He asked gently if something was wrong. She hesitated before admitting she felt changes within her body, changes she had never felt before. His brow furrowed with concern, and without delay, he suggested they seek help from healers. The village healer, a kind old woman named Myra, examined Arya with careful hands. After a long silence, her eyes widened. She looked at Ryan, then back at Arya, and her voice trembled as she spoke. She said the queen was carrying life within her. At first, Arya could not believe it. She had heard those words before in her palace years ago, only to watch hope turn into heartbreak each time. But something in Myra's steady voice and warm eyes made her feel that this time was different. She gripped Ryan's hand, her heart racing. For a moment, silence filled the small room, as if the world itself held its breath. The news spread quickly. The villagers whispered with awe that the Queen of the Stars, long thought unable to bear a child, was now expecting. Some celebrated, calling it a blessing for both their people and hers. Others doubted, unsure if it was truly possible. But one truth stood clear: the Queen's life, once marked by sorrow, was now touched by a miracle. Word traveled far beyond the village. Messages reached the Veyron Council across the stars. When the news reached them, shock rippled through their halls. The queen, who had been given to humanity, thought to be the end of her bloodline, was now carrying an heir. Some council members rejoiced, believing it a sign of destiny. Others muttered in suspicion, worried what this union meant for the purity of their empire. But none could deny the importance of what had happened. For Arya, the days that followed were filled with emotions she had never known so deeply. She felt fear, joy, wonder, and doubt all at once. Each morning when she awoke, she placed her hand gently on her stomach, as if to remind herself that the miracle was real. She walked through the village with a new light in her eyes, and the people noticed. Children ran to greet her with laughter, and mothers offered advice, sharing stories of their own. She listened with care, treasuring every word as if it were a gift. Ryan remained her constant strength. He did not speak grand promises, but he showed his love in quiet ways. He built a chair with his own hands so she could rest more easily. He worked longer hours in the fields so she would not tire herself. When she felt fear in the night, he reminded her that they would face every challenge together. As weeks turned into months, the change in Arya grew more visible. Her steps slowed, her form softened, and her face carried a glow that no crown had ever given her. The villagers watched in wonder, and even those who once doubted now offered their support. They brought food, blankets, and small gifts, saying they wanted to be part of this moment in history. For though she was a queen, she was also one of them now. Yet not all hearts were at peace. Some humans feared what the child might be. Would it look human or alien? Would it belong more to Earth or to Veyra? Would it bring unity or conflict? No one had answers, and in that uncertainty, worry grew. Among the Veyrans, doubts were even louder. Some nobles claimed the child should not be recognized as heir. Others feared the child might carry traits beyond their understanding. Arya felt the weight of those doubts, but she did not allow them to break her spirit. She told Ryan that the child was not a symbol to be debated but a life to be cherished. For her, it was not about power or throne, it was about hope, the hope she had thought forever lost. One clear night, Arya stood outside with Ryan, looking at the sky. The stars stretched endless above them, and she whispered that for the first time, they no longer seemed distant. They seemed close, almost listening. She placed Ryan's hand on her stomach and told him that whatever the future held, their child would be born from two worlds but raised with one truth: love. In that moment, the quiet life they had built no longer seemed ordinary. It was the beginning of something greater, something that would touch not only their own lives but the destiny of both species. The childless queen was no longer childless. She was a mother-to-be, and the universe itself seemed to shift around her, as if preparing for the heir who would soon arrive. The news of Queen Arya's pregnancy spread across both worlds like fire carried by wind. For many, it was a miracle that inspired joy and wonder. Yet for others, it stirred unease. A queen who had once been childless was now carrying a child with a human, and the meaning of that shook the beliefs of many. On Veyra, the council chambers filled with restless voices. Some nobles stood to celebrate, claiming the child was proof of destiny, a gift that could unite two species. Others raised their voices in anger, saying that an heir born from a human father would stain their bloodline. They argued that such a child could not sit upon the throne of stars. Some even whispered that the queen had betrayed tradition by allowing herself to be tied so closely to humankind. The debate grew so fierce that messages were sent across the stars, demanding that the queen return to Veyra for the birth. But Arya did not answer those demands quickly. She remembered too well the coldness of the palace halls, the constant eyes watching her, the weight of judgment on every breath she took. Here in the village, though surrounded by whispers, she felt safer and freer than she ever had among her own nobles. On Earth, reactions were mixed as well. Many villagers saw the queen's pregnancy as a blessing, a bond between their small world and the great empire in the sky. But in the cities, some questioned what the child would be. Would it look more human or more alien? Would it carry strange powers? Would it truly belong to either world? Doubts turned to fear, and fear spread like a shadow. Ryan saw these doubts rising around them. He heard the whispers in the market, the hushed voices of travelers who came to the village, the uncertain tone of officials who visited from the human council. But he stood firm by Arya's side. He did not answer the whispers with anger. Instead, he offered steady words, reminding all who asked that the child was not a threat but a gift. Still, even Ryan could not shield Arya from the weight she carried inside. At night, she lay awake, her hand resting on her growing stomach, listening to the faint stir of life within her. She feared for the child's future. Would her daughter or son be accepted? Would they live as a bridge between two worlds or be torn apart by both? She carried hope, but hope alone could not silence doubt. One afternoon, a group of Veyran envoys arrived at the village. They wore robes of silver and blue, their faces calm but their voices sharp. They bowed to the queen but wasted no time in speaking. They said her duty was to her people, that the child must be raised under the traditions of Veyra, not in a simple human village. They warned her that if she remained, the throne might reject her heir. Arya listened, her face calm but her heart heavy. She told them that her child was not a piece of property to be claimed by councils or nobles. Her child was hers and Ryan's, born of two worlds and meant to belong to both. Her words were firm, but the envoys' eyes revealed their doubt. They returned to their ships, leaving behind silence and unease. Not long after, a gathering took place in the village square. Humans and Veyrans who had come to witness the miracle argued openly. Some demanded that the child be raised on Veyra. Others said the child should remain on Earth. Voices clashed like storms. Arya stood among them, her eyes moving from one group to the other, feeling the tension press in from every side. It was Ryan who spoke then. He did not shout or command. He simply told them that a child should not be judged before it has even opened its eyes to the world. He reminded them that children were not born to carry divisions but to create futures. His voice was calm, steady, and filled with a quiet strength that made even the angriest voices pause. Arya watched him with pride. In his simple words, she heard more wisdom than all the arguments of the council. The crowd slowly dispersed, their anger softened, though not gone. Doubt still lingered, heavy as a cloud that refused to move, but a small light had broken through. That night, as the stars stretched wide above, Arya sat outside with Ryan. She confessed her fears to him. She feared the child would be used as a symbol, pulled by both sides until she was no longer free. Ryan listened in silence, then placed his hand gently over hers. He told her that no council, no noble, no fearful crowd could take away what they had created together. Their child was not a banner of war. Their child was a bridge, and a bridge was meant to connect, not divide. For the first time in days, Arya felt peace return to her heart. She leaned against him, feeling the steady beat of his presence. Though shadows of doubt circled around them, she realized that their strength did not lie in the voices of councils or the approval of crowds. It lay in their bond, in their quiet promise to protect the child no matter what storm might come. And so, beneath the wide human sky, the queen and the farmer held on to their hope. The shadows of doubt had not vanished, but hope was brighter. Deep within her, the life of their child continued to grow, untouched by fear, waiting for the day when the world would finally see what miracle had truly begun. The seasons turned again, and Queen Arya's time drew near. The village had grown used to her presence, yet now every villager carried a quiet excitement. The Queen of the Stars was about to give birth, not in a palace of crystal towers, but in a humble house of wood and stone. Both worlds watched closely, waiting to see what kind of child would arrive. The night before the birth was restless. The sky above the village was filled with heavy clouds, and thunder rolled far in the distance. Some villagers whispered that the skies were mirroring the importance of what was about to happen. Inside the small home, Ryan kept the fire burning bright while Arya rested. Her face was pale but calm, her hands folded gently over her stomach. She looked at Ryan and said softly that no matter what came, she was ready. When the first pains began, the villagers hurried to call Myra, the healer who had first confirmed the pregnancy. Myra came quickly, bringing with her women who had helped with many births before. Though nervous to stand in the presence of a queen, they carried baskets of herbs, cloths, and water, ready to do all they could. The hours that followed were long and heavy. The storm outside grew louder, rain falling hard against the roof, as if the heavens themselves were waiting. Arya fought through the pain with quiet strength. She did not cry out in fear, though her body trembled. Ryan stayed near her side, holding her hand, whispering words of comfort. He told her she was strong, that she was not alone, that their child would come safely. At last, after what felt like endless hours, the cry of a newborn filled the room. It was a sound unlike any other, clear, strong, and filled with life. The storm outside seemed to soften, the thunder fading into silence as if nature itself bowed to the moment. Myra lifted the child, wrapped in soft cloth, and placed her in Arya's arms. The queen looked down at her child with eyes wide in wonder. The baby's skin was a gentle shade between Veyron silver and human warmth. Her eyes, though still new to the world, shimmered with a faint light, as if stars had left their mark upon her. She was both human and Veyron, yet fully herself. Arya held her close, tears slipping down her cheeks. For years she had carried the weight of failure, the title of a childless queen. Now that burden was gone. She whispered a name into the quiet room: Lyra. It meant light in the ancient tongue of Veyra. To her, the child was truly the light that would guide both worlds into a new dawn. Ryan leaned close, his rough hands trembling as he touched the baby's tiny fingers. He smiled with a joy deeper than words, his heart filled with pride. He had never dreamed his life would lead to such a moment, yet here he was, holding the heir of an empire, his daughter, his hope. News spread swiftly through the village. The people gathered outside the small home, waiting anxiously. When Myra stepped out and announced that the queen had delivered a healthy child, a cheer rose into the stormy night. Men, women, and children alike celebrated, not as subjects of an empire but as witnesses to a miracle. Far beyond the village, the news reached both councils. On Earth, leaders debated what this meant for their future. Some saw it as a sign of unity, a chance for humans to share a bond with a powerful empire. Others worried that the child might bring political struggles or demands. On Veyra, the nobles were divided. Some rejoiced, calling the child a blessing foretold in old prophecies. Others still resisted, unwilling to accept that their future ruler carried human blood. But none of those distant voices mattered in that first night. Inside the small home, the queen and the farmer looked upon their child with hearts full of love. They did not see politics or fear. They saw a future, a promise, a life untouched by the arguments of councils. In the following days, the villagers brought gifts: blankets, carved toys, baskets of food, and small keepsakes. Each gift carried a piece of their hope for the child. They lined outside the home not out of duty but out of joy, eager to catch even a glimpse of the little heir. Arya grew stronger with each passing day. She would sit by the window, cradling Lyra in her arms, watching the world with a peace she had not known in years. Ryan often joined her, resting quietly beside them, his hand resting protectively on the cradle they had built together. One evening, when the stormy season had passed and the sky was clear again, Arya carried Lyra outside. The villagers gathered in the square, waiting in silence. She raised her child for all to see. The starlight shone gently on them, and the crowd broke into applause and cheers. It was not the roar of a royal court, but it was louder in its truth. It was the sound of people accepting a future that was no longer distant but alive in their midst. In that moment, the childless queen was childless no more. The heir of two worlds had been born, and with her first cry, the path of history had changed. Whether the people of Earth and Veyra were ready or not, the child had come, and she carried within her the light of a new beginning. The years passed quickly, and little Lyra grew before the eyes of both humans and Veyrans. From her earliest days, it was clear she was no ordinary child. She had her father's steady gaze and her mother's graceful presence. When she laughed, it carried warmth that filled every heart. When she spoke her first words, both languages came naturally, as though she had been born with the voice of two worlds. In the village, children played with her as if she were one of their own. She ran barefoot through fields, climbed trees, and chased fireflies with carefree joy. Yet, at the same time, she carried an aura of quiet strength that made even the elders pause. People often said that when she looked at you, her eyes seemed to see more than your face. They seemed to reach into your heart. As Lyra grew older, visitors began to arrive from beyond the village. Scholars from Earth came to study her, curious about her mixed heritage. Veyron envoys came as well, bringing gifts of fine cloth and books filled with ancient knowledge. Each visitor carried their own expectations, some with hope, others with doubt. To them, she was not just a child but a question. Could she truly be the heir of an empire? Would she ever be accepted by both worlds? The questions soon became tests. One season, the Veyron Council sent teachers to instruct her in the history and customs of her mother's people. They expected her to struggle, yet she listened carefully, remembering every word. When asked to recite long passages of their oldest songs, her voice carried them perfectly, as if the language had always lived inside her. The teachers left surprised, whispering that perhaps she truly carried the blood of their stars. On Earth, human leaders arranged for her to attend gatherings where she met children of diplomats and scholars. At first, some treated her with suspicion, staring at her silvery eyes and the faint glow of her skin. But when she spoke kindly to them, sharing stories of the village and joining their games without pride, their hesitation faded. Soon they were following her lead, laughing and playing as if she had always been among them. Still, not everyone was convinced. Some Veyron nobles insisted she would never be fully one of them. Some humans warned that she might not truly belong to Earth either. Arya and Ryan heard these doubts often, but they chose not to burden Lyra with them. They wanted her to grow not under the weight of fear but with the freedom to discover who she was meant to be. At home, her lessons were not only of books or traditions. Ryan taught her to work with her hands, to plant seeds, to mend fences, and to carry her share of the load. He told her that no matter her title, she should know the value of honest work. Arya, meanwhile, taught her the wisdom of leadership. She spoke of patience, of listening before speaking, of holding strength without cruelty. Between them, they shaped their daughter not just into an heir but into a person with balance. There were moments when Lyra's own strength surprised even them. Once, when a dispute broke out between villagers and travelers, voices rose and tempers flared. Before Ryan or Arya could step in, young Lyra walked into the circle. She did not shout or command. She simply spoke calmly, asking each side to share their words one at a time. Her voice was soft, but it carried weight. Slowly, the anger melted, and peace returned. The villagers later whispered that the child carried the gift of harmony itself. As she grew older, more challenges came. Scholars questioned her intelligence. Nobles questioned her right. Leaders questioned her future. Yet time and again, she rose to each challenge, not through pride or defiance, but through kindness, patience, and quiet courage. She did not try to prove she was greater than others. She simply showed she was willing to learn, to listen, and to stand firm when it mattered. Arya watched her with pride, often remembering the lonely years when she believed she would never have a child. Ryan watched with quiet joy, proud that the daughter he once held as a tiny baby now carried herself with the strength of both their worlds. Together, they often spoke at night, wondering what future awaited her. They knew it would not be easy. The throne of Veyron was vast and heavy, and humans, too, would watch closely. Yet they also knew that their daughter carried a gift no throne could give. She carried the trust of both worlds in her heart. One evening, when the stars shone bright and clear, Lyra asked her parents why so many people looked at her with such expectation. Arya took her hand and explained gently that she was born at a time of great doubt, and her life itself had become an answer. Ryan added that she was not meant to carry the weight of everyone's hopes alone, but to remind them that unity was possible. Lyra listened quietly, her young face serious. Then she smiled and said she did not wish to be only a queen or an heir. She wished to be someone who brought peace where there was division. Her words filled Arya and Ryan with hope. They realized that the child who had begun as a miracle was now shaping herself into a light that could guide all who followed. The trials of the heir were not over. More would come, and the world would continue to question. But for now, in the small village where her life had begun, Lyra stood as proof that two worlds could come together in harmony. And with each day, her presence grew into something larger than anyone had expected, the promise of a future where fear would give way to trust. The day finally arrived when Lyra was no longer seen as just a child of the village but as the heir of two worlds. The Veyran Council called for a great gathering, one that had not been seen in generations. Leaders from Earth were invited, along with scholars, envoys, and representatives from both species. The place chosen was a vast hall built on neutral ground, where the banners of both Earth and Veyra hung side by side. Arya and Ryan walked with their daughter through the hall's wide doors. Lyra was now in her late youth, her steps confident, her eyes calm. The murmurs of the crowd followed her as she passed, some filled with wonder, others still heavy with doubt. Yet when she looked upon them, her face carried no fear. She walked not as someone seeking approval but as someone ready to share her truth. The council began with formal speeches. Veyran nobles spoke of their traditions and the long history of their empire. Human leaders spoke of cooperation, trade, and the challenges of trust. Yet beneath the polished words, everyone waited for the moment when the young heir would speak. Some expected her to stumble. Others hoped she would shine. When the time came, Arya stepped forward first. Her voice was steady as she told the story of her years of silence, of how she once believed she would never bring an heir to her people. She spoke of her loneliness and the weight of expectation, then of the unexpected path that led her to Earth, to Ryan, and to the life they had built together. Her words carried honesty, and many in the hall lowered their heads in respect. Then Ryan spoke. He told of the simple life he once lived, of fields and work, of how he never expected to be tied to the fate of empires. He spoke not as a leader but as a man who had given his heart to family. He said that the greatest strength was not in titles or crowns but in the bonds of love that could grow between even the most distant of people. At last, all eyes turned to Lyra. She stood at the center of the hall, her voice soft but clear as she began. She spoke first not of power but of belonging. She told them how she grew among both humans and Veyrans, how she learned to listen to stories from each side, and how she never saw herself as divided. To her, she explained, she was whole, carrying both heritages as one. She then turned to the nobles who had doubted her and said she did not seek to erase their traditions but to honor them. To the human leaders, she said she did not wish to rule above them but to stand beside them. Her words carried no pride, no demand. They carried only truth, spoken with the honesty of someone who had lived it. The hall grew quiet as she continued. She reminded them of the years when humans and Veyrans had stood apart, each fearing the other. She told them that fear had never built peace, but trust could. She declared that her very life was proof of this trust. She said that if two people from distant worlds could come together and create a bond, then surely two entire civilizations could do the same. For a long moment, there was silence. Then, slowly, the crowd began to respond. Some nodded with respect. Some whispered to one another. A few even rose to their feet in quiet applause. What began as a murmur grew into a wave, voices lifting in agreement, clapping hands filling the hall. The council, though bound by caution, could not ignore the shift in the room. The nobles who had once doubted were silent now, their eyes lowered. The human leaders exchanged glances, many of them softened by what they had witnessed. In that hall, the questions of years seemed to find their first true answer. After the gathering ended, people spoke not of division but of hope. They told each other that perhaps a new era had begun, one led not by fear but by unity. In the days that followed, treaties were written, councils were formed, and for the first time in history, humans and Veyrans began to work together as equals. For Arya and Ryan, it was a moment of quiet pride. They had not sought to build an empire, nor had they dreamed of crowns or thrones. They had simply chosen each other, and from that choice had come a legacy greater than either could have imagined. As for Lyra, she stood at the edge of this new world with clear eyes. She knew challenges would still come, and not all doubts would vanish overnight. But she also knew that the future was no longer shaped only by fear. It was shaped by the courage of those willing to see one another as family. One evening, as the sun set over the horizon, the three of them stood together outside their home. The fields stretched before them, the sky painted in shades of gold. Arya placed her hand on Ryan's, and Lyra stood between them. For a moment, there were no thrones, no councils, no burdens. There was only a family, bound by love and trust. In that simple moment, they knew that their story had become more than their own. It had become a seed planted deep within two civilizations, a seed that would grow into peace if carefully nurtured. The childless queen who once believed her line had ended now saw before her not just an heir but a legacy of hope. And so, the tale of Arya, Ryan, and Lyra lived on not as the story of conquest or power, but as the story of how two worlds found a future together through the courage of a family who chose unity over fear.